The world has always remembered the Cold War as a battle of nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, and a constant fear of global annihilation. Images of mushroom clouds, underground bunkers, and tense diplomatic meetings have become symbols of an era when humanity lived under the shadow of a single catastrophic decision. But behind those headlines existed another war, one that was almost entirely invisible. It was fought not with tanks or bombers, but with whispered conversations, hidden cameras, encrypted messages, and intelligence officers who believed that information could be more valuable than an army. In this silent conflict, a few overheard words spoken in the wrong place could change the balance of power between the United States and the Soviet Union. Governments invested billions of dollars trying to answer one question: who would know the other's secrets first? And in that desperate search for an advantage, some of the most brilliant scientists and engineers in America were asked to solve problems that seemed impossible. One of those solutions would become one of the strangest intelligence projects ever conceived. The Central Intelligence Agency seriously attempted to turn an ordinary house cat into a Cold War spy. To understand why such an extraordinary idea was ever approved, it is necessary to forget everything we know today and return to the late 1950s and early 1960s. The Cold War was entering one of its most dangerous phases. The Soviet Union had successfully tested nuclear weapons. Both nations were developing intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of crossing oceans in minutes. And every major political crisis carried the terrifying possibility of escalating into nuclear war. Washington believed that Soviet intelligence organizations, such as the KGB, were operating aggressively across Europe and around the world. At the same time, the agency was developing a reputation for encouraging unconventional thinking. The Cold War rewarded innovation because traditional methods often failed against equally determined adversaries. Scientists, engineers, psychologists, physicians, and military planners were brought together to solve problems that had never existed before. Some projects focused on advanced reconnaissance aircraft. Others explored miniature listening devices, improved communications, and new photographic technologies. A number of experimental programs investigated ideas that, decades later, would seem almost unbelievable. Yet inside the atmosphere of Cold War urgency, even highly unusual proposals could receive serious consideration if they promised a strategic advantage over the Soviet Union. The concept gradually evolved into what would eventually be known as Project Acoustic Kitty. According to later declassified CIA documents, the objective was to determine whether advances in miniaturized electronics and specialized surgical techniques could transform a living animal into a mobile surveillance platform. Still, the stakes of the Cold War encouraged persistence rather than skepticism. If the project succeeded even once, officials believed it might provide access to conversations that no human source could safely approach. During those years, the United States was willing to invest heavily in experimental intelligence capabilities because the potential reward always seemed greater than the financial cost. Compared with the strategic value of obtaining reliable information from behind the Iron Curtain, even expensive research programs appeared justified. Within the CIA, Project Acoustic Kitty became another example of a broader philosophy that dominated the era. If a scientific possibility existed, it deserved to be explored before America's adversaries explore it first. As work quietly continued behind closed doors, very few people outside the intelligence community had any idea that such an operation even existed. There were no newspaper headlines, no congressional debates, and certainly no public discussion. Everything surrounding the program remained classified. The scientists assigned to the project understood that they were participating in one of the agency's most unusual experiments. Yet they also believed they were contributing to the larger mission of protecting the United States during one of the most dangerous periods in modern history. Whether history would ultimately remember the project as visionary or impractical had not yet been decided. For the moment, only one question mattered. Could the impossible actually be made to work? In the next phase of the project, the agency would move beyond theory and begin attempting something no intelligence service had ever tried before. The transition from an idea discussed inside secure conference rooms to a functioning intelligence operation required far more than imagination. Once Project Acoustic Kitty received approval to move forward, the CIA faced a reality that no amount of strategic planning could avoid. Building miniature surveillance equipment was difficult enough, but integrating that technology into a living animal without preventing it from behaving naturally represented a challenge unlike anything the agency had attempted before. Engineers, technicians, veterinarians, physicians, and intelligence specialists were brought together to solve a problem that existed nowhere else in the world. Every improvement in electronics created new possibilities, yet every solution introduced another obstacle that had to be overcome before the project could ever leave the laboratory. During the early 1960s, miniaturization was still in its infancy. Today's smartphones contain more computing power than entire Cold War intelligence facilities. But at the time, even reducing the size of a simple radio transmitter required cutting-edge engineering. The agency needed a microphone sensitive enough to capture normal conversation from several feet away, a transmitter capable of sending that audio to nearby receivers, a reliable power source, and an antenna that would not interfere with the animal's movement. Every component had to fit within a body that had never been designed to carry electronic equipment. Weight, balance, heat generation, battery life, and signal quality all became engineering problems that demanded careful experimentation. According to declassified CIA records, the project involved surgically placing components inside the cat's body. The microphone was positioned to maximize its ability to capture nearby voices, while the transmitter and other electronic elements were concealed beneath the skin. An antenna was incorporated along the animal's tail, allowing signals to be transmitted to listening equipment operated by CIA personnel positioned at a safe distance. The objective was not to create a robotic animal or somehow control the cat remotely. Instead, the technology was intended to transform an otherwise ordinary animal into a passive collection platform that could move naturally through locations where people rarely questioned its presence. If successful, the operation would rely on the simple assumption that nobody would suspect an ordinary cat of carrying classified. The surgical procedures themselves required extraordinary precision. Intelligence officials understood that if the animal appeared uncomfortable, behaved unnaturally, or showed visible signs of modification, the entire concept would fail before the first field test even began. Every detail was designed to preserve the illusion that nothing about the cat was unusual. This reflected a broader philosophy that guided many CIA operations throughout the Cold War. The best intelligence asset was often the one nobody ever noticed. Whether it was a concealed camera hidden inside an everyday object or a listening device disguised as part of a room, success depended on invisibility rather than sophistication. Training, therefore, became one of the project's most time-consuming and uncertain phases. Handlers worked to condition the cat to move toward designated locations and remain focused despite distractions. The goal was not to teach complicated tricks, but to establish consistent behavioral patterns that would make operational deployment possible. Every successful exercise suggested progress, while every unexpected detour reminded researchers how unpredictable their subject remained. Unlike machines that could be calibrated or adjusted with precision, living animals constantly introduced variables that could not be completely eliminated. Each training session demonstrated both the remarkable possibilities and the severe limitations of the concept. The financial commitment reflected the seriousness with which the CIA viewed the program. Declassified documents indicate that the agency invested millions of dollars in research and development over several years, while later estimates often placed the total cost at approximately $15 million. Historians note that exact accounting across different phases of the program is difficult to establish from surviving records. Regardless of the precise figure, there is little doubt that Acoustic Kitty represented a substantial investment of time, personnel, and resources. Critics looking back from the 21st century sometimes focus exclusively on the unusual nature of the project. But inside the Cold War intelligence community, expenditures were frequently judged against the potential value of information rather than the apparent oddity of the methods used to obtain it. It is also important to understand that Acoustic Kitty was not an isolated example of Cold War experimentation. The same period produced remarkable advances in aerial reconnaissance, satellite technology, miniature cameras, encrypted communications, and specialized surveillance devices hidden inside everyday objects. Many of those projects succeeded spectacularly and shaped modern intelligence for decades. Others failed quietly and remained classified for years. Acoustic Kitty belonged to an environment where agencies were encouraged to test unconventional ideas because no one could predict which experimental concept might eventually provide a decisive strategic advantage. The competition between Washington and Moscow rewarded innovation, even when that innovation carried significant technical risks. Inside CIA headquarters, optimism gradually grew that enough progress had been made to justify a real operational test. Engineers believed the equipment functioned as intended under controlled conditions. Trainers had achieved encouraging results in selected exercises. Intelligence officers now wanted to answer the only question that truly mattered. Would the entire system perform outside the laboratory, surrounded by the noise, distractions, and unpredictability of an actual city? Planning for the first field operation began with extraordinary care. Every detail had to be coordinated. Surveillance teams prepared receiving equipment. Operational personnel selected an appropriate location. The cat would be released near individuals engaged in conversation, allowing officers positioned nearby to determine whether the transmitted audio could be collected successfully without attracting attention. By the time the first operational test was ready, Project Acoustic Kitty represented years of classified research and an extraordinary investment of talent. The engineers had done everything they believed modern technology would allow. Surgeons had successfully implanted the electronic components. Trainers had spent countless hours attempting to condition the animal's behavior. Intelligence officers had carefully selected a location where the mission could be evaluated under realistic conditions. From a CIA's perspective, this was the moment when theory would finally confront reality. Every intelligence program, no matter how promising inside a laboratory, ultimately faced the same question. Would it work in the field? During the Cold War, there was no substitute for operational testing because real environments rarely behaved the way planners expected. According to accounts that emerged after portions of the program became public, the first field exercise took place near the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., where the objective was to position the cat close enough to individuals engaged in conversation for its concealed microphone to capture useful audio. Surveillance officers equipped with receiving equipment waited nearby, prepared to evaluate both the quality of the transmission and the animal's behavior. The concept appeared straightforward on paper. If the cat wandered naturally toward the target area, nobody would suspect that one of the world's most advanced intelligence agencies was quietly listening through an animal that looked no different from any other stray wandering the streets. The mission depended on remaining completely invisible. What happened next has become one of the most debated aspects of the entire story. A widely repeated account claims that shortly after being released, the cat wandered into the street and was struck by a passing taxi, ending the mission almost immediately. The image is dramatic, memorable, and has been repeated in books, newspaper articles, documentaries, and countless online discussions. Yet historians have pointed out that the surviving declassified CIA documents do not actually confirm this specific incident. The official records acknowledge that the project proved unsuccessful and was ultimately abandoned, but they do not explicitly state that the first operational animal died beneath the wheels of a taxi. It is possible that the story originated through later recollections or secondary reporting, but based on the documentary evidence available today, the exact circumstances of the field test remain uncertain. What the records do make clear is that the central problem never disappeared. The electronics could function. The engineering challenges, while difficult, had largely been addressed. The greatest obstacle was always the animal itself. Even after years of research and training, the The cat remained unpredictable in ways that no amount of planning could fully eliminate. It could become distracted by movement, unfamiliar sounds, food, or instinctive curiosity. It could choose a completely different direction from the one intelligence officers hoped it would follow. These were not technical malfunctions. They were natural behaviors. In the controlled environment of training sessions, those variables could sometimes be managed. On a busy city street, surrounded by countless distractions, they became impossible to control with confidence. For the CIA, unpredictability was unacceptable. Intelligence operations often depended on precise timing measured in seconds. Looking back, it is tempting to dismiss the entire project as little more than an expensive curiosity. But doing so ignores the environment in which these decisions were made. During the Cold War, failure was accepted as an unavoidable part of innovation. For years, almost nobody outside the intelligence community knew that this extraordinary experiment had ever existed. The files remained classified, the personnel involved rarely spoke publicly, and the operation gradually faded into obscurity. Only decades later, as Cold War documents began to be declassified under growing public pressure for transparency, did researchers and historians uncover evidence revealing just how far American intelligence had been willing to go in its search for an advantage over the Soviet Union. When those records finally reached the public, they transformed Acoustic Kitty from a forgotten internal experiment into one of the most remarkable and frequently misunderstood episodes in the history of the CIA. But perhaps the greatest surprise was still to come, because the release of those documents revealed that the story was about far more than a single cat. It offered a rare window into the mindset of an era when governments believed that almost any idea, no matter how unconventional, deserved to be explored if it might help prevent losing the Cold War. When historians look back at Project Acoustic Kitty today, it is easy to focus on its unusual premise and overlook the larger story it represents. A project involving a cat equipped with surveillance technology naturally captures public imagination, and over the years, it has often been reduced to a punchline or a curious footnote in Cold War history. Yet that interpretation misses something far more significant. Acoustic Kitty was never simply about a cat. It was about how two global superpowers, locked in a competition they believed could determine the future of civilization, constantly searched for new ways to gain even the smallest strategic advantage. The project reflected a mindset that dominated the Cold War. If there was even a remote possibility that an unconventional idea could produce valuable intelligence, it deserved to be investigated. In an era when the consequences of surprise could include nuclear conflict, imagination became a strategic resource alongside military strength, scientific research, and industrial capability. The declassified documents surrounding the program reveal an intelligence community willing to invest years of effort into solving problems that had no obvious solutions. They also demonstrate something equally important: the willingness to acknowledge when an experiment had reached its limits. Contrary to the popular belief that governments simply continue funding every classified program indefinitely, the surviving CIA records show that officials ultimately concluded Acoustic Kitty was not practical for operational use. That decision reflects an essential but often overlooked part of scientific and technological progress. Innovation is not defined only by successful inventions. It also depends on recognizing failure, learning from it, and redirecting resources toward ideas with greater potential. Throughout the Cold War, countless experimental projects quietly ended in much the same way. Most remained classified, and many were forgotten long before the public ever learned they had existed. What makes Acoustic Kitty especially fascinating is that it emerged during one of the most remarkable periods of technological acceleration in modern history. This is one reason historians caution against viewing failed projects in isolation. Research rarely follows a straight path. Every ambitious program, whether successful or unsuccessful, contributes knowledge that influences future work. Engineers discover technical limitations. Scientists identify new possibilities. organizations refine their methods and improve their decision-making processes. Even unsuccessful experiments often answer important questions by demonstrating which approaches are unlikely to succeed. In that sense, Acoustic Kitty became part of a much larger process through which intelligence agencies gradually learned how to combine technology, surveillance, and operational planning more effectively. The project did not revolutionize espionage, but it belonged to an era that unquestionably transformed it. The story also serves as a reminder that history is often shaped by ordinary people confronting extraordinary circumstances. Behind every classified memorandum stood individuals who believed they were helping protect their country during one of the most dangerous periods of the 20th century. The engineers designing miniature electronics, the physicians responsible for delicate procedures, the trainers attempting to influence animal behavior, and the intelligence officers evaluating operational risks all approached their work with seriousness and professionalism. None of them could know which project's history would celebrate, and which would eventually become forgotten experiments hidden inside government archives. They simply responded to the challenges of their own time using the best knowledge and technology available to them. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of Acoustic Kitty. It reminds us that fear, uncertainty, and competition have always pushed nations toward extraordinary innovation. Sometimes those efforts produce revolutionary breakthroughs. Sometimes they produce expensive failures. More often, they produce a mixture of both. The Cold War was not won through a single weapon, a single operation, or a single invention. It was shaped by thousands of decisions made across laboratories, military installations, intelligence headquarters, diplomatic offices, and research facilities. Some of those decisions changed history forever. Others quietly disappeared into classified files, waiting decades to be rediscovered by historians. And perhaps that is why Project Acoustic Kitty continues to fascinate us today. Not because a cat was ever expected to win the Cold War, but because the project captures the extraordinary mindset of a generation living under extraordinary pressure. It reveals a time when imagination became a strategic weapon, when scientific curiosity intersected with national security, and when protecting a nation sometimes meant exploring ideas that sounded impossible. History is filled with forgotten experiments, abandoned prototypes, and classified operations that never achieved their original goals. Yet each one offers a valuable window into the people who built them and the world they were trying to defend. Acoustic Kitty was one of those forgotten chapters, a remarkable reminder that, in the Cold War, the search for knowledge could take America to places that still seem almost unbelievable today.